Good morning, everybody. How are you? I'm quite ill, actually. No, I'm a bit more ill than that, but I've been ill about 12, 14 days, something like that, and I'm going to run a risk of ostracizing half of my audience here, but guys, you know when you've got a cold? You women, you wouldn't understand. You really wouldn't understand how bad it is. I'm sorry. Just coughing there. Oh, dear. I have been quite badly, as my grandma would have said. However, today I'm going to talk to you for a short period of time about whose back are we watching. This is a continuation of the sort of James things we've been looking at, and when Luke spoke to us, he basically gave us sort of, I would say, carte blanche to look at the book and sort of like pick out on something that sort of appealed to us, really, something that we thought, yeah, that's an interesting thing to sort of look at. And as I've got a spare eye patch, I built a whole word around it. Remember last time I used an eye patch? Well, this one arrived about 3 days after I'd spoken, so I had to buy the other one in a rush. So I'm going to get my money worth out of that £1.20 from Amazon. I picked James 5 to look at. Now, the fact of the matter is, throughout our lives, we all have to have somebody watching our back. It's just good to have that. If you've not got someone watching your back, then you're playing with half a deck of cards. So just to look at James 5, 19 and 20. It says this: "My brothers and sisters, if one of you should wander from the truth, and someone should bring that person back, remember this. Whoever turns a sinner from the error of their way will save them from death and cover over a multitude of sins. My brothers and sisters, if one of you should wander from the truth and someone should bring that person back, remember this. Whoever turns a sinner from the error of their way will save them from death and cover over a multitude of sins." At the beginning of James, the very first line of James, it says this: "James, a servant of God and of Lord Jesus Christ, to the 12 tribes scattered among the nations, greetings." So that's how James opens his book. James is talking to a massive family, the family of Israel. To the 12 tribes, that's his audience. I think, when you're looking at, I'm not a Bible scholar, but when I look at if I'm reading a book of the Bible, it's important to know the background to it. Who wrote it? What did they write it for? Who did they write it to? It helps put things in context. And I'm going to talk quite a bit about context today, because I think some of the things we read in the New Testament, they're hard for us to bring into a modern day context, so we need to work a bit to do that. But James was clearly writing to Jewish converts out of the 12 tribes. That's absolutely clear in this one anyway. It's not always as clear as that, is it? And these Jewish converts lived all over the place, scattered among the nations. They weren't in one place, scattered among the... This is James saying, to my family out there, who live all over the place, let me tell you some stuff. And the book is full of instruction. It's full of teaching, telling us how to live, telling us bits and bobs about how to make life join up and to make more sense. About how to live together, living humbly, living in harmony, living as a family, maturing. It has a fair amount of practical advice within it, encouraging us to do works, not just have faith, for example. It's quite a difficult verse for us to understand. We need to think hard about that. It encourages us to anoint the sick. But it also encourages, in this other verse I've just read, to challenge somebody if they need challenging. And that's quite a hard thing to do. Now, I'm going to link quite a bit today of what I'm going to talk about to family. I think James did that anyway. The Bible does that all over the place. But before I start, I need to, I do recognize that not everybody comes from a strong family unit. It's not everybody has that experience. And, I have no intention to cause any grief or upset for anybody that might not come from that. However, the family unit is generally considered to be a good thing. It's a good thing. It's a good thing to be part of a family. And it's a good thing to be part of a strong family unit in a natural sense, but also in this sense. I've spoken many times individually with, and I mentioned it last time I was here, about this, you lot, this family. It's a good thing. But comparing the two, the natural family and the spiritual family, if you like, that's what we're going to, the church family, sometimes the comparisons work really well. Sometimes they better take a bit more teasing out. As a bit of a reminder, I spoke a few weeks ago on the armor of, well, I didn't speak on the armor of God. We spoke on the armor of God. I picked up on one point of that. We spoke about Ephesians 6, which is the next slide. And a brief reminder of what that talked about was, remember, breastplate of righteousness. There's a helmet of salvation, which is what I spoke about. Actually, that's nothing to do with this helmet, by the way. That's an incidental, but it's quite good, I suppose. The shoes of peace, the shield of faith, the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God, and the belt of truth. That's what the few of us that spoke on that generally covered. Now, there's a common denominator that sort of goes through that when you're talking about armor. All those armor, all those things are either to defend from the front or attack forwards. You look at them all. So you've got to say, who's watching that soldier's back? When he's attacking forwards, when he's meeting that attack, who is watching his back? Who is watching his flank? Who is watching his side? Who's doing that? Now, the Roman army, I mean, I'm not a particular historian, but I know a bit about, well, no, actually, I know nothing about the Roman army. But I've looked it up. It's hard to find stuff on that sort of thing nowadays, is it? So I looked a bit up on the Roman army. And you know what? They were amazing fighters. They turned the world upside down. Absolutely, drove across continents. They were incredible fighters, but there were many things that made that possible. Discipline, order, structure. But also, they looked after each other. The next picture shows a picture of, this is one of their formations, but they were famous for their formations. This is called something like a turgis or something, but it means tortoise. So this is one of their formations, but there were quite a few that's similar to this, similar in concept. A wedge is another one. The square, they're similar sort of ideas. But the idea being, as you can see, is you've got protection all around. You've got cover. And when they were going in to fight, essentially, sometimes barbarians, that were mainly the Scottish, but actually, I'm really sorry if you're Scottish. I love the Scots. But when they went to fight people that were not disciplined, that were not organized, then this meant that they could do that, and they could smash them apart. But it also meant that these guys here, their protection was these guys behind. That's where their protection came from. Didn't come from their own. They couldn't protect their own back with their shield, but the guy behind them could. And if the guy behind them let them down, then they were in serious trouble, and the whole thing fell apart. The whole wedge, square, tortoise, whatever you call it, the whole thing fell apart if you get a hole in the middle, because they were interdependent. I nearly called the word today, I thought about calling it interdependence, because it's really what it's all about. We are interdependent. As a natural family and as a church family, we belong to each other and we rely upon each other. When I spoke before, I looked at this picture, which is the next one up here. If you remember, I'd noticed a lot of cars with their headlamp out. And it was something that had sort of lodged in my mind. Having a headlamp out is quite a hazardous thing for a car driver. I remember I said you lose balance, you can't always get your perception of distance right. And having a headlamp out is a serious issue. And I explained that sometimes we go through life with one headlamp out because we're not protecting our mind. When I'm driving a car with a headlamp out, I can actually see I've got a problem. Theoretically. More than likely. I might ignore it, But theoretically, I can see that I've got an issue. I'm going to look at the next picture. When I've got a tail lamp out, I can't see it. Well, if I've got a light out the back of my car, most of the time, unless I'm backing into a garage or something like that, I wouldn't know. You pull into somewhere and someone says, "You've got a tail light out, mate," and that's how you know, because a well-meaning stranger tells you. The back lights of your car are at least as important as the front lights, because if I'm driving along and I brake, the people behind me know that I'm braking because of one of two things. First of all, I slow down. And secondly, because they see my brake lights. And if I'm going quickly and they're too close to me, they can't react quick enough to slow down quick enough before they hit me. That's how it works. So brake lights and tail lights are very, very important, but I can't see them. I need somebody else to tell me when that's broken. When that's broken, I need you to tell me that my rear lights are broken, because I can't see them. I've got a little example. Now, I need a willing volunteer. Alfie, could you give us a little hand? Come on, pal. This is going to make you look like a God small g. It really is. It'll take you 2 minutes. Brilliant. I've got him in the hand boiled. Brilliant. Thanks, Alfie. You're the man. Right. Now, Alfie is going to play the part that we all play. So if you can just look that way. What I've got here, Alfie, is some numbers, right? The illustration is basically you can't see what's going on behind you. That's all it is. But I'm not doing anything stupid. I'm not going to make you look daft, I promise. So look that way. Right. So I've got a number there that Alfie can't see. You lot can. I mean, it's a very basic example, but you can see that number, can't you? Now, there's a moment in Alfie's peripheral vision where he will be able to see this number. I don't know when that will be, but when you see it and you can read it, 7. There we go. It's because he's young, and I got back there when it was me. So he's picked up on it straight away. He got it quite early there. But here, no idea. Could be anything. Can't see it. I mean, it's a basic illustration, but you get my point. Now, Alfie, I want you to put this eye patch on. Take those off there. So put that on.
No, I really can't.
And put this helmet on here. There we go. Right. Now, Alfie can see considerably less now. And in actual fact, he can see more on, which side is the eye patch on? He can see more this side than he can that side. So I'm going to put another letter, the number rather. So this is the good side. At what point can you see it?
4.
Okay. And then on this side, at what point can you see it?
8. 6.
It had to be virtually right in front of him before he could see it. Also, you know, wearing these things, you can't hear as much either, particularly when you've got the visor down. When we're in life, when we've got people watching over our backs, that's brilliant. But we can choose to put a helmet on and to put an eye patch on, or we could choose to basically block out everything that's behind us if we don't want to hear what they've got to say. We still have to be open. We have to be open for them having input into our lives. If Alfie chooses not to look at me, not to know what I'm saying, he could go through life with this tiny, narrow vision here because he's okay. But he's not okay. He's blocked everybody else out. As brothers and sisters that might be able to talk to him and say, "Alfie, you're doing this wrong, pal. You've blocked it out." And how many times do we do that? In my times, why have I done that? Thank you very much, Alfie. You get 10 out of 10. You keep the eye patch.
No. Keep my glasses.
You keep the glasses as well. Thanks, mate. Big cheer for Alfie. Thank you very much. It's a really basic, practical illustration, but we go through life like that, like horses do. We choose to do that. We don't always, but you get what I'm saying. The language James uses is interesting because he describes the reader as brother and sister. He chooses that language. Throughout the New Testament, the church repeatedly uses the phrases about family, doesn't it? Brothers, sisters, etc., etc. And in addition, this book is largely thought to be written by James, the brother of Jesus. So there's quite a lot of other family things going on here. And when he's saying my brother and sister, he's literally saying, because he was a Jew as well, he's literally saying, part of my 12 families, part of my 12 tribes, my brothers and sisters. That is literally what he's saying. It's a big family, even bigger than Jenkinson's. But, well, maybe not. That's crazy talk. But it's a big family, isn't it? You know, but they were still family. And that creates in me a challenge about how we connect to the church family, the way the Bible teaches it and the example it sets. How we connect to the church family is practical, and it makes sense because of our culture. But it's actually very different to how the early church would have connected as a family. Quick show of hands in here. I mean, I live quite away from this church. Who here lives within 500 yards of this church, roughly speaking? Within 500 or 600 yards? A few people. How many people live, would you say, up to 2 miles away? A few more people. How many people live up to 5 miles away? A few more people. How many people live 10 miles away? You know what? We're not in the community culture like they were in the early church. We're very different. Our world is different now. Now, we have other ways. I mean, obviously, if you live 10 miles away from a brother back in the early church days, then you may as well live on the moon. You know what I mean? You know, we've got different ways of keeping in touch and electronic wizardry and cars and things like that. But you understand the point I'm making? We just can't wander into somebody's home because they happen to live next door but one anymore. It doesn't work like that. Our culture is different. The level of intimacy that's described in the New Testament lends itself to a culture that is physically close to each other. It just does. Doesn't mean that we can't reproduce that level of intimacy, but it's harder for us because we don't live next door to each other. We're not in each other's pockets like we used to be. When I leave here today, I will get in my car, or Rachel's car actually, and drive 10 miles to my house and have dinner, lunch, wherever you come from in the country. It's dinner where I come from. And then, as it happens, we're going to be back tonight for this meeting. But ordinarily, I may not see anybody from this church until Tuesday night, perhaps, a life group. And then that might be it until next Sunday. So that level of community that could be built up by connection, by physically seeing each other, is harder to do. And we need to reproduce that deliberately rather than allow it to happen by chance. If we don't reproduce that deliberately, then we actually find it hard to receive a challenge from a brother or a sister because they've not earned the right. I'm going to read a scripture I'm going to read it out, but please be reassured. I am not proposing that we live in some sort of bizarre Yorkshire kibbutz, all right? Believe me, I ain't selling my house and my assets to move in with you lot, all right? But let me read this scripture out. This is from Acts 2. So this is Acts 2, a really fundamental chapter in the Bible, isn't it? Holy Spirit's fallen, big speech, loads of people saved. Let me read what gets said then. And all that believed were together and had all things in common. And they sold their possessions and goods and parted them to all men, as every man had need. And they, continuing daily with one accord in the temple, breaking bread from house to house, did eat their meat with gladness and singleness of heart. See, that describes a level of intimacy that we are a gazillion miles away from. And that, it's culturally not where we are today. We don't live in each other's pockets. We've got transport. We just don't live like that anymore. The job that I have takes me 400 miles away in a day sometimes. It's crazy. The life is not like that anymore. But that was why some of the things make sense when you read them in the New Testament, because that's the way they were living. That's the culture they were living in. That level of intimacy doesn't exist, I don't think, in any Western church. And I think it would be a bit weird if it did. I think we would look odd, like some type of Yorkshire kibbutz, When we're all, yeah, well, to join our church, you've got to sell your house and come and live with us. Hey, where do I sign? It's not going to happen, is it? Culturally, it's miles away, and that's fine. You know, sometimes when you read stuff in the Bible like that, it's not saying this is what you need to do, but but you need to look into it and think, well, what benefits does that provide, and how can we reproduce them in today's culture? That's not an order that Luke's saying there. You've got to go and do that. That's not what Luke's saying at all. But he's saying that's what they did, because they were pulling together. This description, however, of being part of a family is useful to us to aid understanding of God's intention for our church and help us to make a little more sense of instructions like this in James, where it talks about challenging your brother or your sister. Let's have a look at the benefits of living in a healthy family. Love, security, belonging. You know, when we were at school, there were always that hard family, where there were like 17 kids and they were all like interrelated. That family had more security than anybody else in the whole school, whoever it was, you know. I don't know what it was in your school. I can think of 2 or 3 families at my school there. Oh, yeah, well, that's his brother and that's his whatever. The place that I work is a big company based in a small town, and everybody's related, you know, and you've got strength in that. Belonging, protection, health, emotional support. I still get a large amount of emotional support from my mum and dad. Values. I don't get values from my mum and dad now at 50, although to be fair, I do. I got them when I was 5. I got them when I was 10. That's when I was getting values off my parents, and so on and so forth. But as part of this family, we can pick up a different set of values as well. Church values, God stuff. Because it's not all that intuitive sometimes what God's saying. Sometimes it's not obvious. So we learn it from this environment. Practical helps. Balance. Come back to that balance word again, don't we? People knocking shoulders off each other and keeping them in line. And then you've got families that have a behavior. They have a type. Is this your family? Controlling. Some families are a bit controlling, aren't they? Or they're loving. Some families are a bit loving, a bit intense. Reliable. Unreliable. We always had to be reliable in our family. That was a big thing for me, Dad. Tidy. Intimacy. I think my family's reasonably intimate. Structure, rules, strength, discipline, instruction, direction. Not all families are the same, and some will have strong points in that. Some will be really loving, but they might be really, really untidy. Actually, that's a bit of a stereotype. If you're loving, you're not untidy, believe me. I'm not saying that. But you know what I'm saying? Some people will be strong in one area, perhaps less strong in another. That's okay. That's the structure of your family. And this is the structure of our family. And we get this from being part of something. First time, when I was a kid, you know when you start to go to somebody else's house for a sleepover or something like that. So when I was, I don't know, 21, 22, no I wasn't. When I was 8 or 9, I can't remember. That's probably the first time I went to someone's house and stayed overnight. And you realize they're not like your family. You think everybody's like your family when you're in your family, but they're not. So you go there and, I don't know, they go to bed at a different time, or they don't drink Coke, or they drink Horlicks, or whatever it might be. You know, or maybe they just do it because you're there. But you're learning about being part of a different family. Well, this is how families are. All are different, none are perfect. But it's generally accepted, I think. I think we could all accept it, but I think psychologists, if not, I'm going to say psychologists accept it because I think they probably would do. There's benefits of being connected. There's benefits from being part of something. There's benefits from being so close to your brothers or your sisters that you're prepared to accept that they can challenge you. Come back to James 5 in that car with the tail lamp out, and the question is, whose back are you watching? Who are you specifically looking out for? Not accidentally looking out for, specifically looking out for. I can't look out for all you lot. Generically I can be looking out for you. If I bump into one of you and I see you in town and you're in trouble, then I would help you. But specifically, who am I closest to in order to provide a brother's help or a sister's help to? Who is it? It's not accidental, it's deliberate. I think that James's advice might work in, if you like, non-Christian relationships. But I do think he specifically wrote it to Christians because he said he did. He said he wrote it to the 12 tribes. He said he wrote it to converts. And he's calling them brothers and sisters. He's not talking about reaching non-Christians. He's talking about restoring Christians. That's what he's talking about. He's talking about Terence Clark speaking to somebody else who's also Christian and saying, what are you doing? Or somebody else talking to Terence Clark and saying, what are you doing? What are you doing that for? That's what he's talking about. James is actually giving two messages. One to the person that's being challenged and one to the challenger. It's probably a good time to say, by the way, that challenging someone does not mean it's okay to be a busybody or an interfering person. That is not what James is talking about. He's talking about relationship challenging. Unless it's a word of knowledge, which is a little bit different, he's talking here about having a relationship with a brother or a sister that enables you, because you love them and they love you, to receive your word. But what he's saying is, be prepared to challenge somebody. Be prepared to do it. It's very hard to challenge people. It really is. But be prepared to do it if you feel it's the right thing to do. And secondly, if you are challenged, receive it with grace. Actually, even if it is a busybody, receive it with grace and ignore it if you feel it's wrong. Because that's just because we're good people, aren't we? But if it's not from a busybody and it's from someone that loves you and cares you enough to talk to you, listen to what they're saying. Even now, at my age, if my brother or my sister, and we have up and downs in our relationships, we're not always all that close, but if they saw me doing something really seriously bad, stealing off my company or whatever, something that really was taking me down a terrible road, they would talk to me. They would. I know they would. Say, what are you doing? It's not you. You don't do that. I'd like to present a challenge to us all to seek brothers and sisters in this room that we trust enough with our spiritual lives, that we love enough, and that we know love us enough to approach us with the right spirit. There's a story which is not my story. I've used it once before on a men's breakfast. Apologies for that, but it's a good story. About the emperor's new clothes. It's brilliant. There was an emperor, or it could be an empress. This is boys and girls. They were vain people. Easy to inflate their ego. Thought themselves above everybody else. Two tailors visited them and sold them the concept of a suit of clothes that only the bright and intelligent could see. They saw not only were the clothes extraordinarily beautiful, only the intelligent and the wise could see them. The king or queen fell for it, commissioned them to make the clothes, and upon delivery, of course, he couldn't see them. But he said how lovely they were. And all his wise men also said how wonderful they were. In short, the emperor or empress was naked, but nobody told them. There was nobody watching their back, stopping and walking around naked. But you've all been the emperor or the empress at different times in our lives. No doubt about it. And we've not wanted people to tell us that we're naked. Sometimes we've even blocked it all out with a helmet and an eye patch. But that's why we need to keep the intimacy of this environment, because it makes it easier. It makes it easier for people to talk to you when they are rubbing shoulders with you more regularly. If you don't see you enough, if you're not part of the family isn't enough, it's harder for people to correct you. And then it's you that lose, not them. So I'd like to suppose a challenge this week. We've got 6 days, 7 days before we're back again. During the next 6 or 7 days, let's take 5 minutes to pray about this every day. Just on this particular topic. And let's recognize we're in it together, because that crazy scripture I read out about all living together and all that. That may be not where we're heading. Well, no, it's not where we're heading. Reassurance. But you know what? There's bits we can nibble off that and say, you know what? I want that bit. I want to be connected with people that will care about me enough to risk me falling out with them. So the challenge is to pray. Who is that person? Whose back am I watching? Whose back am I uniquely positioned to look after? Because nobody else is watching it. And who's going to watch my back? Maybe that might lead to conversations. It may be that it doesn't. It depends how sort of touchy-feely and how open you are, and that's fine. If you feel you want to talk to somebody about it, that's absolutely brilliant. But even if it doesn't, let's still pray about that. Because we need to learn to love each other more. We need to learn to help each other more. And we need to know who's loving and helping us. And let's be a help to ourselves and others. And let's all work to reach our full potential. Thank you.